Welcome on this preparation movie of how to do experiments. This is something that you should look back each and every time you are going to do a lab for physics that is for a mark. Because if you do a lab for physics for a mark, I will give you a piece of paper and expect you to fill in at before the end of the lesson and that I give it back. So you need to work quickly and know what's going on. And in that, just to help you as well, I will also give you this piece of paper that is already online as an attachment to the ensemble. And it basically says what each steps are. There are a few steps. There's a research question, hypothesis, method, results, graph, conclusion, and discussion. And I'm going to mark all the different things and then get some mark. And basically, the each experiment, it starts with me telling you to measure something, and then we're talking about then you need to put that into a proper research question. And with physics, a research question is almost always what is the relationship between and And on these two things, most often are the independent and dependent quantities. And I'm not going to write down this research question on the board, but the most it will be something like what will happen to the extension if the force increases, and then you should figure out something with extension and force and relationship. So what is the relationship between the force and the extension? If you know this, if you have seen this, then if you have a proper research question, you already know which two are the independent and dependent quantities, because these two you are going to measure. After the research question is the hypothesis, and the hypothesis is really asking you, before you do the experiment, what do you expect and why? And hypothesis is not wrong or right. A hypothesis is well thought out or well explained why. You basically need to explain why you have this expectation. Okay, during in a method you have to make a sketch of the setup and it has to be crystal clear what is what. So you need to annotate them, just like you learned with biology in the first year. So simply, if you have, for instance, a spring, then you simply draw a line to it and you write next to it spring. So everybody knows what a spring is. The other thing with a method is the CID. And just to remind you, I have put down to the bottom what it is. So you need to identify the CID of the experiment. You please make sure you write down how you keep the control constant and how do you measure. The CID, what do you need to ask yourself if you want to identify it? I would start with the I, and with the I, you always ask yourself, what numbers did I pick or choose, or what numbers will I choose? And for the D, the dependence, what other quantity will change? And just to remind you, the I and the D should be in the research question. And then always something has to be the same, kept the same. And what do you have to keep the same to get the same results if you're going to redo the experiment or if someone else is going to do the experiment? Then on the back of the paper is you need to write down the results in a table. Before you can make a graph, you need to make a table. You always put the quantity and unit at the top of the column. And you should also write down the value of what is controlled. The graph should be cutless, so there should be crosses, units, a title, line of best fits, axis labeled, the size should be proper between 5 and 10 centimeters, and a linear scale. Then a conclusion. In a conclusion, you basically need to answer the research question. Because the research question is about relationships, you need to get a relationship in the conclusion. If you don't know what relationship there is, you need to take a look on page 313 in your book. There you can see different relationships: proportional, linear, quadratic, inversely proportional. They're all different types of relationships. You have learned them with math, and we use them with physics. Um, and then discussion, that's where it gets a little bit more difficult. That's where you write down, how can you measure more accurate? There's always a possibility to measure more accurate. How can you do that? How can you improve on your measurements? And take a look at the measurements, especially in your graph. Do you think they are correct or not? And how can you tell it from the graph? Okay, I just for those of you that were very good to watch the movie, the experiment is going to be about the about springs, the extension, and the force on a spring. So take that to heart, and then if you know, I guess you already should be able to write down the research question you think about it for a few, and the hypothesis. Um, Good luck with the experiments, and don't forget, you don't have lots of time, you need to get to it.